Welcome, everybody, to the opening and our little inauguration of the exhibit home and Indigenous interpretation, or response, I should say. I'm going to introduce Melanie Yazzie. She is the organizer, curator of this print exchange, and she'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. I've actually known Melanie since about the mid-1990s. Her and I were both graduate students at CU Boulder, and we took a class together with Lucy Lepard. And I think we're both in this book, Mixed Blessings, right? And we got to know each other. And one of the first, and at that time, I had the opportunity to be able to teach a college course. We had what they call a GPTI. So basically, I taught a drawing and later on a painting course. Well, I never had the chance to make my own syllabus. And one of the first people that was very helpful was Melanie. She gave me some examples and gave me some hints. So from there, I think, well, what a nice, wonderful human being. Especially to help some poor person that had no idea. I mean, obviously as a student, I had seen syllabi, but to put one together, you know, I still to this day thank her for getting me started with that. Another thing that I remember her by was we all had to give presentations in this class of Lucy Lepard. And I remind her of this story all the time. But what she did is she had her camera, I believe, and then she had some change. And she walked up to everybody and she says, "Hi, little girl or little boy, I have some change here. Can I take a picture of you?" And she was just playing off the idea of her being Native American and people doing that to her as a child. But the thing in particular I remember, I mean, I got it right away. But the thing I remember is this other young woman that was in her class, when Melanie did that to her, she began to weep. She began to cry. It really struck a chord in her. It made her, I don't know if it made her feel guilty or what exactly. I don't remember the whole context, but maybe Melanie might elaborate a little bit on that. But she now is a professor at CU Boulder. She teaches printmaking. And she's a wonderful artist. Her piece is this first one here. But I would like you to join me in welcoming her here to Regis University.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Tony. Thank you to the library. I also want to acknowledge the Indigenous people whose land we're on. Thank you for having us. I started organizing a lot of these print exchanges, thinking about how I could get young people and more established artists showing and exhibiting out in the field. I had gone through undergrad and graduate school in different situations where I, in a sense, was challenged as a Native and as a young woman. And it was just interesting to me once I got into the field of, going up for tenure. I thought, why aren't there more people doing this type of thing? Where are the minority people? How can we encourage more people to go forward in this direction? And I realized that the people who are able to do it in the past, maybe professors of mine were people who were very aggressive, who wanted to get their work out there. And I realized that that was something that maybe somebody who was very shy and coming from a community like mine might not be willing to do. So I started organizing print exchanges with established artists and emerging artists so that we could get the work out into the world and give those young people a place for their works to be exhibited. And in that way, I thought I'm giving back to this whole realm of education in a more positive way, because I just saw too many different things that were holding different people back. So when these print exchanges come together, I'll come up with a theme for the project, and this project for this is home. And oftentimes the theme will come about in a really interesting way. I think I had a friend who had cancer, and there were a group of us that were growing our hair to donate to Locks of Love. And I realized that in talking about that process of growing our hair, and it was something that we could do to help our friends, but because there's so much you can't do, you can't control different things. And so I started talking with some other printmakers about it, and they said, let's do a printmaking project about that. And so we called the project Hair Farming, and we reached out to different artists who were doing this, and they made prints about it. And then that project went to be shown in different locations. And all of these projects that I do are about educating the public about something I feel that might be overlooked, or joining people together. And with this project, I called out to different Indigenous artists, and everyone was responding to the works in their own way. At the back of the room on the far right, we have C-Mac Stevens, who's Seminole Muskogee, and she was raised in Oklahoma and did a lot of work reflecting on her childhood. And there's layers within her prints that I just think are really incredible. She's really a sculptural artist, but recently, it's like within 20 years we've been friends. I've forced her to make prints, and so she joined into the project. And you'll see when you read each of the statements by each artist what their intent in the piece is. The piece to the left, the green piece, is by Sue Pearson. She's from Norfolk Island, and her people are descendants of the whole story Mutiny on the Bounty, where the English people mix with the Tahitian people, and there's a whole story about that. And her people come from a tiny island in the South Pacific. It's like 5 miles by 8 miles, and we met for the first time in 1995 at an Indigenous gathering in New Zealand. And we had both been sent away to a boarding school, and at the boarding school we learned about printmaking. She went to a boarding school in Australia. I went to a boarding school on the East Coast outside of Philadelphia, a Quaker school, and we both discovered printmaking. And when we met at this Indigenous gathering, we started talking about how we love printmaking and how prints just really spoke to us about materials, about making multiples. We had this fascination with the paper that we were working with. And so we connected through that. And then again, with each project that I work on, I try to include Sue in the project. The next print to the left is by Joe Feddersen, and Joe is from the Colville people, and he wanted to talk about the elk and the migration of those animals. And so you'll see sort of a petroglyph-like image in his lithograph monotype piece that he's made. And Joe, for many years, worked at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And I had gone there for some projects, and he was a mentor of mine. And so, of course, when this project came together, I spoke to Joe and said, would you participate in this? And he said yes. So that's Joe's piece. We have Neil Ambrose Smith, who is the next piece with the rabbit. Neil is Salish Kootenai from the Flathead people up in Montana, and his mother is Jean Quick-to-See Smith, and Jean's piece is here. Mother and son, they work together, they inspire each other. I met Neil through Jean, and Jean is one of my huge mentors. I met her when I was in graduate school. I was researching the 1990 Indian Arts and Crafts Law, which says that you have to have your certificate of Indian blood to prove that you're native to be making any art. But we all know that there are different things that have happened within our history where people were sent away from their lands, where they're undocumented. It's very difficult to prove your identity as an Indigenous person. And so when I connected with Jean back in the 1992, I was talking to her about the 1990 Indian Arts and Crafts Law, and we became really good friends, and she encouraged me to stay in graduate school. And since then, we've kept this friendship relationship up. And so when I do these projects, people always say, oh my God, how is it that you know Jean Quick-to-See and Joe Feddersen? And I said, we're all good friends, we work together. And that's what's beautiful about art making and printmaking, is that you can do multiples, and you can, in a sense, trade them like trading cards. And then over time, these artists become just really amazing people out in the world. The next piece in the corner there is by Glory Tachitni Kampoy. She's Navajo, and I met her when I first moved to Tucson, Arizona. I was teaching at the University of Arizona, and I had gotten this email from this young Navajo woman, and she said, I would love to have a critique with you. I have an exhibition at this location, and would you come? And I called her up, and I went the next day, and she was like, this is amazing. I didn't think you would respond at all. And we had this long 2 or 3 hour critique in this location, and then she was saying, I want to be an artist, but I'm not in the community, and I'm very shy. And I said, I'll put you in a bunch of projects, and we'll get you out there. So then Glory became a part of the group. The piece in the corner there, the two of them, one is by Miley Andrade, who's from Hawaii. I met Miley in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, the island of the long white cloud. And I kept seeing Miley there at different Indigenous gatherings, and she'd say to me, you know, we always see you over here in Aotearoa. You're never over in Hawaii. How come you're always over here? And I said, well, the Maori send me a plane ticket. And she said, oh, well, we'll get on it. We'll get you a plane ticket. And so she wrote a grant, and I ended up going to Hawaii a couple of different times, and again, that connection was really strong. Norman Akers, the black and white print, it's about coming back and forth between indigenous and non-indigenous land. Norman worked for some years at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and we met there. He was a painter, and now he teaches in Kansas, and he's just a really wonderful person. We've served on different panels together, and I always know that I can call on Norman to participate in these projects. This is by yours truly, Mr. Tony Ortega Hakal. It's a beautiful piece about home. And I remember at one point I was talking to Tony about these projects, and he said, I'd really love to be in a project with all these different people. I was like, of course, you fit right in. We should do it. And so this, in a sense, home was out of a request from Tony of wanting to be included. And I said, well, let's just put one together. And so this piece came together, and it's so wonderful that this home project has been exhibited in a number of different places around the country. And so it's really great that it's here. This is Alex McCarthy, who's Macaw, and it's about the whale hunt. And Alex is a young printmaker, and I met him when I started doing projects at the Longhouse at Evergreen. And some time ago, one of his family had passed away, and someone at the Longhouse contacted me and said, you know, Alex has been having some trouble with family things, and he's just been a little sad. And I said, well, I think it's time for him to be in a project. Anytime a printmaker needs something to do, you put him in a project, and we start printing, and all of a sudden your worries are mixing ink, counting paper, tearing paper, you know, layering. And so and the story that he tells, you'll read this, it's really beautiful. So that's my connection with Alex. I spoke about Jean. This is Corky Claremont from Salish Kootenai people. Corky and I have known each other through Joe Feddersen, but also we did a project at the Rutgers Center for Innovative Print and Paper, the Brodsky Center, invites different artists to work there. And there was a group of us that were invited to work at this center, the Brodsky Center at Rutgers. And Corky was one of those artists, and we connected through that project. And then over the years, through all of these people, we all sort of keep in touch by email, by phone, by different gatherings, and we just keep making work together. And then this is a screen print that I made for the project that has a map of home. And I use maps in my work a lot to speak about land base and where we come from, and to remind people that this is Indigenous land. And then in this, I have different things that are important to me that are circled and highlighted in the map. And that's sort of a little self-portrait of myself with little buffalo horns that I covered up with little clouds. And there's rain, because we're always praying for rain at home, and the rain is coming down and going through me and then coming through my whole body. And a lot of times in my work, there are, I guess, movements that look like the internal system of how water or food is going through you. I do a lot of work talking about diabetes. I'm a type 2 diabetic, and so I'm always looking at my blood sugars. And I just completed an exhibition at the Wheelwright Museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I brought this tiny handout so you could see some of the works that I make for that project. And a lot of these have my blood sugar numbers and then plants and things from home in the pieces. There are monotypes and paintings, and they're all inspired by childhood memories. This series of bronzes are inspired by childhood bullies. I think when my dad was a principal and a superintendent when I was growing up, and whenever the bad ones would want to get back at him, they'd come after us at recess. And so I decided a way to combat a lot of those feelings of dealing with the bullies was I started these works of animals and then named them after common Navajo names, which some of them are pretty funny. Yeah, this image here says, Stormy and Highway hit the road to Denver. Johnny and friends all come from Winter Rock. Let's see, Clark, Pino, Gus, and George herd sheep in Navajo. So they have these common Navajo names, but they're doing different things that are done at home. And it's really struck a chord with a lot of different people. I think a lot of young people who've come to see the exhibits, when they see the pieces that I've made about bullies, they realize that there's a way that they can channel some of their experiences into their artwork. This piece is called Two Minds Meeting. I started making the sculpture pieces to speak to larger audiences. I think the three-dimensionality of the sculptural pieces at times are at the same level as people, and there's a conversation that happens when people look at the three-dimensional pieces. So I just, with the work that I'm always doing, I'm always thinking about how to connect with my audience, with different people, and how to tell a story. And a lot of times it may begin from a painful place, but then I try to change it and empower myself and put it into put a positive spin on it, if that makes any sense. But I feel like I just could go on and on talking, but I would love to get some questions from some of the students. So either a question or a comment. So I'll start. Are you one of Tony's students?
Okay. She's one of my students.
Okay. All right, so comment or a question. And if you could give us your name.
Hi, I'm Lauren. So has getting the ability to work with these artists changed how you see yourself?
Yes, I think knowing these artists, when you know who they are, they're so incredible, and it makes you raise your game because you're exhibiting with Tony Ortega, with Jean-Quick Smith, with Joe Feddersen. So it automatically makes you take things more serious and really push to get the project shown in a lot of different places, because it's not about you, it's about the whole group of people. Good question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kate. What is one thing in particular you want people to take away from this exhibit?
One thing that I want people to take away from the exhibit is the idea of community, and that art and ideas like this can bring people together, because this is an art exhibit, but you could do it with writing, with poetry, with music, getting groups of people together and forming a community. That's an idea that I think is really amazing, that you can reach out to 2 or 3 friends and put a project together. And it doesn't have to seem really gigantic. And then slowly you get used to doing the projects and you get comfortable, and then you don't feel so alone anymore. That's what I would love people to go away with.
I'm Nick. You talked a little bit about what each piece means to a certain artist and what it means for them to be in a print exchange. What does it mean for you to be able to bring all these people together and be in the exchange yourself?
It means family to me. My family is really wonderful, but also very dysfunctional. And so at times I look to my artist friends and my art community for that family that I really want to provide a supportive place for me. Because sometimes in my own family there's a little bit of dysfunction and it's not there. And so within my art family there's this giant support system and an understanding, because we're all in the art world and we make things in this other way that's abstract, that's like talking about different issues. And so it just gives me a sense of community and family, which I think is great.
Hi, my name's Gabby. Sorry, this is my voice right
No
now.
worries.
What does this show mean to you, since it's about home and representing the different artists' point of view of home?
What does this show represent to me as it's speaking about home? It represents each of these communities, and that everybody who sees this exhibit will learn about each of these communities. And in a sense, it's breaking the stereotypes of what Indigenous people are. You'll notice that there aren't a bunch of feathers or a warrior on a horse. You know, there's certain stereotypes that are out there within the Indigenous community, and a lot of us that are contemporary Native artists, we're trying to combat that and trying to have people see us in a different way, and so that's what this exhibit does.
Hi, I'm Selena. I just wanted to know if you have a favorite art exhibit that you've done.
Oh my gosh, I'd say they're all my favorite. I'm obsessed with curating and organizing these projects. I'm really strangely shy and I don't hang out with a lot of people. Like, this is my socializing when I do stuff like this, but otherwise I'm at home making art or emailing people to be in a project and then sending out reminders saying, get your print done, send it to me. And that's my way of socializing, so it's good.
Hi, my name is Javon. I just wanted to know, what was that moment where you're like, all right, like printmaking, this is what I want to do?
Oh my gosh. That moment came when I was in high school. I went to that Quaker boarding school, and my roommate, her name was Haynes Sprunt, and she had these etchings, and they were of shells, and they were about that big. And I remember she had them in the room on the desk. And I saw them and I just thought, oh my God, those are so beautiful. And I went over, she handed them to me and I touched them. And the paper, like it was fabric and it was so beautiful. And I just was like, what is this? She said, they're etchings. And I said, what's that? Like, how did you do this? And I was touching it and I just thought, this is amazing. And she said, it's an art form and they do it down in the art center. But it was that meeting with her that just like, and feeling the paper and then also smelling it. Because I remember when I held it, the smell, when you're a printmaker and you're printing with oil-based inks, you can really smell that ink. And I just remember smelling it and just being like, what, I need to do this. And it took a couple of years to get there, but I eventually got it, but I never forgot that feeling of the paper. It really hit me. Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth. Our class is about New Mexico Santos, which is mainly centered around Catholicism. Do you bring any of like native religious symbols into your artwork now?
I do, in a sense. I bring my own symbols that represent the sacred into the work, but they're my own creation. I try really hard not to cross that boundary of using images that are sacred. So there are other Navajo artists and other artists who do use those things, but I try to keep it in a safe place and keep the sacred in one place and then keep my own work. But in the work, there are symbols that represent those things that are very religious and spiritual to me. Good question.
Hi, my name is Anu, and how would you say art has helped you as a person?
How has art helped me as a person? It's saved me and it's provided community for me. I think at times I've been very, very shy, and it has been my friend in very difficult times. It's always there. I can always turn towards my sketchbook and draw something or paint something. And as I'm painting or drawing, it's communicating with me and keeping me in a really good place. So it's really helped me in that way. And I always tell my students when they're going through difficult times, I'm like, make a piece, make a print, make an art piece. It'll help you get all of that stuff out. And in that way, it's really saved me. Good question.
Hi, I'm Francis, and I've noticed your tattoos on your arms,
Yes.
and they resemble the New Zealand Maori style tattoos. Are they?
They are, and they have a long story with them. The images on this side, these two designs come from my mother's rug design. This is my father's mother's rug design. And when I first went to New Zealand in 1995, I met a lot of the Tamoko artists who are like the people who do the body work. And at that time, people said, would you like something done? And I said, well, I understand that it has to be something very important. So each time I've gone like 9, 10 times over the years. And then I've had other artists come and visit me. The question has always come up, are you ready? And nothing's really happened. And then I started working at CU Boulder, and I was asked to help co-curate an exhibit of Navajo rugs in the Natural History Museum. And when I was putting the exhibit together with this other woman, I kept looking for rugs by my mother's mother, Thelma Baldwin, and I kept putting it into the system looking, and nothing was coming up. And then I looked for my father's mother, Melanie Yazzie, and nothing came up for her. There were 4 rotations of the exhibit, and the 4th rotation, it happened over a year. The 4th rotation, I called my parents and said, you have to come up. Like, you haven't seen the other ones. These rugs are from our area. You should come see this. So they came up, and I told my parents, like, there are some rugs that look like grandma's rugs, and I want you to see them. So they came into the exhibit. We walked in, and I said, there are rugs over here. Oh, my mom looked, and she said, that's my mom's rug. And I said, what? How do you know? And she said, because I was carrying you when she wove that. We walked over, and the label said, Mrs. Tom Baldwin, which was my grandfather's name, because back then you were named after your husband. And then we found another couple of rugs by her. And then my dad was off to the side, really emotional, and I said, Dad, what's wrong? And he said, this is my mother's rug. And it was labeled anonymous. And so we told the people at the museum, and I just thought, oh my God. And all my life I wanted to have an exhibit with my grandmothers. And here, this whole year, little did I know, both my grandmother's rugs were in the collection, and then my works were up in this building for a year. And then it wasn't till the end of the year that I found out. So I was going back to New Zealand, and I contacted a young Tamoko artist and said, I'd really like you to work on me. And he said, I would love to, but I don't work on non-Maoris. And we can meet and talk. And he said, but you could get Nahuya, you could get Derek Lardelli, you know all the top Tamoko artists. And I said, I know, but I'm a teacher, and part of my job is to pass it on to the younger people and acknowledge the young ones coming up. And you met my grandparents when you first came to see us in '96, and now you're becoming well known for this art form. And he said, well, we'll talk when you get here, but I'm sorry, I just don't work on non-Maoris. So I go to New Zealand, and I'm staying in Whakatane near Rotorua with some good friends of mine. And I told them, I've contacted him, but I don't know if it's going to happen. And the next morning, we woke up, and Pikea, who's originally from Hawaii, he's married to Sue Pearson. He said, did you hear what happened last night? And I said, no, what happened? And he said, a volcano erupted on the island, and it hasn't erupted in 100 years. And I said, that's my sign. I said, I was praying for something, but I'm like, that's it. So we drive to Rotorua, an hour away, and we meet Richard Francis, and he says, Melanie, and I said, yeah, I think you're going to work on me. And he said, when that happened, I knew that I would be working on someone really special today. And I was standing in front of him, and he said, it's going to be here, and it's going to be here. And he started, and we finished in an hour and a half. There were no swelling or anything. He said, I know you're going to think this is crazy, but you need to go south after this. The smoke from the volcano is going south. And I said, well, I'm going to Hastings to see Sandy Adset. And he said, of course, he's the Komatwa of that area. You should see him. I said, I'm going to work with his students. So I went south, and I saw Sandy, and he said, you know, we need to have you tell a story about printmaking to the students. And like, what's a traditional story? And I said, I don't have a story. And so a couple of days went by, and then we were going to school, and I said, oh my God, I have something I have to give you. And he said, what is it? And he goes, did you think of a story? I said, no, I don't have a story. And he said, well, I guess you'll just do a print thing and we'll figure it out. But we're always supposed to have a story. And I said, I don't have a story. It's an English art form. I said, I don't know. So we're getting in the car, but I ran back inside, and I pulled out these two paper towels, because when Richard had done the work, he put the paper towels on here, and he was going to throw them in the trash. And I said, no, that's an original print. And I want to keep it. And so when I saw Sandy Adset, I said, I know you're just going to want to throw this in the trash, but it's my original print from these that carries my family story and everything, and I want you to have them. And he just was like, oh, this is too Toto. It's very special. This is the story, and it ties back to when we first met, and it's all like here. And he said, you didn't talk. I said, I forgot. But here. And so anyhow, anytime people ask about this, I always tell them it's sort of a long story, and it ties into a lot of stuff, and I'm making it really short, but thank you for asking, because it wasn't just done lightly. It was 17 years to get to the point to get them done, but I carry my grandmother's with me, the weaving style from Aotearoa, the sea turtle from Norfolk Island, my husband, and they're all with me. And that's what this exhibit is about family and connections and like just coming together. And now when you guys hear this and you're in Tony's class, this is all starting a path for each of you. This bonding time, this, knowing each other. It happens in these classes and in these times when you meet artists and when you're making your work. It's like really powerful because Tony and I met over 20 years ago, and we've stayed in touch, and we have these connections, and that's what this is about. And it's like, I'm so jealous that you guys are going to be making retablos in your class. Like, holy cow, you're going to be doing that, making them together. If it was my class, I'd be having you guys make 20 of them and trade them with each other. Because it's in those times when you're making work together, creating memories, sharing stories, that you make this really big connection, which is incredible. So thank you for your question. Okay. Anyone back there? You on your cell phone? Question, comment?
Hi, I'm London, and I was just wondering what your favorite project has been and why.
Oh my gosh. Like I said earlier, all of them are my favorite projects because I'm infatuated with the artists that I know and communicate with, and just excited about the work that they're creating and the bridges that we're making with the project. So each one is like its own special thing because they all connect with each other. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emma. Do you work a lot with sculpture?
I do. I do a lot of work in clay. I work in metal. I do surface design. I've started branching out into designing jewelry. So I do a lot of different things. And I don't socialize a lot, so I spend a lot of time in the studio. And if I'm going to socialize with someone, we're making something together. I think at one point when Tony came to my house, we spent a whole day making prints together. And that's how I socialize. It always has to be a project. Other questions or yes?
You mentioned earlier that one of the big drives to do this kind of thing is about educating the public about something that might be overlooked and bringing people together. And what do you think it is about art and printmaking in general that is such a good tool for representation and education?
I think it's the whole thing with printmaking that you can make a multiple from a matrix that you carve or create, and you can make, 10 or 15 of them, and you can share them with other people. That's what I think is really beautiful about printmaking. And there are ways in which you can draw and paint back into them to make them very unique, but it's that multiple that comes from the matrix that is really exciting about the print process. And then with each print process, there's so many different things that you can do in each of the processes that I'm sort of addicted to, like, all of that. I love it. And if you guys get into printmaking, you'll find, like, oh my God, it's crazy making. But good crazy. Other questions?
Carlina, I was just wondering, what's your biggest obstacle as a Native American artist that you face?
Self-doubt. It's me. And that self-doubt and questioning that we all go through. It's like, am I good enough? Can I do it? It's that self-doubt inside that I get stuck in. Because I realize that if I just get out of that thinking of self-doubt and just do something, it'll just happen. And yeah, so I think that would be it, is waking up in the morning and wondering, like, can I do this? Should I do this? Should I do that? That self-questioning is very difficult. But I think that's for all of us. But I find a lot when I work with Native American youth, I'll show them something and they'll say, I can't do it. I don't think I can do it, or I'm not good enough. So if we can sort of somehow channel that into a place of, like, I need to do it. And if you're making work that's about family or community and paying homage to that, then it's not about you anymore. It's about them. And shoot, I always tell my students, if you make something about home or community or somebody that you really respect, that if anyone tries to tear it down, that you will protect it, because it's that important. If it's about your grandmother, your mom, someone you love, like, and you're making that, and then someone says something, you're like, hey, back off, this is really important. And all of a sudden, you have, like, this strong backbone to stand up for it. So that's how I feel about this project, is like, when people say, we can't exhibit it, or we can't, like, you need to do this. I'm like, well, wait a minute. This is Jean Quick to See. This is Tony Ortega. Like, why aren't you going to exhibit this? And all of a sudden, they're like, okay, lady, we'll show it. I'm like, you should. Like, these guys are amazing. They're telling great stories. And then all of a sudden, they're like, oh, my God, you're so passionate. I'm like, well, these guys are my friends. And it's not about me. So people always say, like, how do you get the work out there in the world? And I say, well, if it has a strong story and you believe in it, it's not about you. So the self-doubt isn't there, because you're protecting Tony, you're protecting Jean, Max, your friends. Then you want to get it out there. And it's easy, because then you're like, I'm getting them seen, and I want everyone to know them. So it's good. Other questions or comments? Well, I have a project for some of you, because of course I'm a crazy teacher. So those of you who would like to participate, I think I brought 40 of these, but it's an envelope, and what I'd like you guys to do is take an envelope, write a comment or a thought with your email, and give it to somebody you respect. Just give it to them. But I think we're in this place of, with the phones, and we forget the value, the tangible thing of a letter or something to acknowledge somebody and to say thank you. So please come up and I'll hand them out to you. And you don't have to be in the class, it can be anybody. Come on up. But I'll have you come up because they're videoing. Because if I walk around, they'll say,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's no rules on who. It's whoever you want. And people always tell me after I hand these out, they always say, I didn't get an envelope and I couldn't do it. And I'm like, it can be any envelope.
Thank you.
But this beautiful envelope just gives you the feeling of like it's really special. Yeah, there's a lot here, and if you want more than one, because sometimes people have more than one person they want to write a card to.
Thank you.
Yeah. There you go. Others, I've got a bunch here. Yeah, here you go. Yeah. Here. Here you go. I'm going to give one to Tony. So anyhow, thank you so much for your beautiful comments and questions. And please enjoy this exhibit while it's here. Thank you, Tony, for exhibiting your set here. It's so meaningful to share it with the students. Thank you.